In this guide, I'll show you guys how to write the final 3 sections of your paper. Section 6 is about the Ice Age and recent geology of New York and New England, so mainly the Ice Age, beginning and end of through the Ice Age. Section 7 has to do with present-day geology that you guys saw on the trip in New York and New England, so that's things like the cave, the weathering and erosion at Thatcher Park, the Hudson and Connecticut River. And then the last section is a conclusion, which will highlight what you have covered in your research paper through the first 7 sections. So what you want to do, like always, is have your timeline open, have your paper open next to it, and then you want to go into your daily guide, and you can see on slide 4 here that the guide for writing sections 6 through 8 of your paper is linked as number 7 here. And what this will talk about, I tried to divide it up into 2 sections. So think of section 6 as all about the Ice Age. I want you to cover the stuff that's listed in the bullets here. So you'll start kind of with a brief overview of the Laurentide ice sheet. So just mentioning that this is the continental glacier you see in this picture here that covered most of North America during the last glacial maximum. And you want to give dates for the Ice Age. So when did this most recent Ice Age begin, and when did it end? So hopefully you have that in your timeline. If not, you've got to go back to the New York Geology reading to find those dates. What you'll focus on with the Ice Age is specifically its impact on areas we saw on the trip. So after giving kind of this brief overview of the Ice Age in general, I want you to focus on a couple of things here. So one is you're going to talk about the glacial lakes that formed from the melting of the glaciers. So there's Glacial Lake Albany and Glacial Lake Hitchcock. And these 2 glaciers, if I go to this picture here, these 2 glacial lakes, so you can see one in color here, and then here's Glacial Lake Hitchcock here. So these 2 glacial lakes you guys have read about in your reading. You have some information on how those formed. And you'll also write about not just how they formed, but how eventually did they become the Hudson River, which flows through New York, and then the Connecticut River, which we saw on the trip as well. So that'll be a key part of the glacier section. What you'll also talk about is this is kind of related to that, is as that process was happening, how the glaciers essentially through erosion carved out giant U-shaped valleys, which we see as the Connecticut River Valley and the Hudson River Valley. So you'll focus on the rivers, the glacial lakes, the Hudson and Connecticut River Valley. You're also going to do a brief kind of explanation as how the glacier that moved through the Hudson River Valley carved out and exposed the cliff at Thatcher Park. The last section of the Ice Age, what I want you to do is talk about the effects of the melting glaciers, the weathering and erosion effects of the melting glaciers on the Clarksville Cave. So you have to think about what was happening when all the meltwater was seeping into the ground at the Clarksville Cave, and how that probably formed the sinkhole which we entered through, the ripple marks in the walls, etc. So kind of a brief impact of the melting glaciers on the cave itself. Section 7 has to do with present-day geology, so this is relatively easy. This is more of a description of kind of the impacts and changes that are happening today in the sites we visited. So you're going to kind of start this section with kind of an intro sentence, and then discuss kind of the Hudson and Connecticut River that we saw, and the age of those rivers and some of the features you saw of those rivers, so you can use your field guide. Weathering examples you observed at Thatcher Park. So pick a few examples of how the cliff is being presently weathered by various means. You can decide which examples you want to use. And then you'll do a section in this section 7 on the weathering and erosion and features that are inside the Clarksville Cave. So what I want you to talk about there is stalactites in the cave, flowstone, ripple marks, features you saw in the cave and how they're formed by weathering and erosion, and some sort of concluding sentence here about the impacts of kind of weathering and erosion on these sites. The last section, you've made it, is when you get to section 8 is a conclusion. And this one you'll write yourself, similar to the introduction, but kind of conclude and wrap up your paper in, probably 3 to 5 sentences, no more. Once you've done that, you've finished your paper, and you can begin kind of the revision process, which I'll make a separate slide, separate video on. That'll involve kind of, using your checklist, previewing the rubric, and other materials to make sure everything's good before you submit it on Classroom.